You think you know the face of war. You think the bloodiest single day in American military history was the storming of the beaches on D-Day in 1944. Or perhaps the meat grinder of Iwo Jima. You would be wrong. The single darkest, most horrific day did not happen in the trenches of Europe or the islands of the Pacific. It happened right here, on American soil, next to a quiet, sleepy little creek called Antietam in Maryland. 23,000 casualties. Let that number sink in. That is not in a month of fighting. That is not in a week. That is in just 12 hours. If you do the math, that is roughly one soldier being shot, blown apart, or bayoneted every single second for half a day. More Americans died on this one September day than in the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, and the Spanish-American War combined. Welcome to the single bloodiest day in American history. Welcome to September 17, 1862. To understand why this massacre happened, you have to understand the desperation of the moment. It is 1862. The Civil War has been raging for over a year, and contrary to what the North expected, they are losing. Confederate General Robert E. Lee is riding high on a wave of victories. He decides to play the ultimate high-stakes gamble. He invades the North. His goal is psychological and political. He wants to take the war out of Virginia, feed his hungry army on Maryland farms, and convince Britain and France to officially recognize the Confederacy. If he wins here, the United States of America might cease to exist. Facing him is Union General George McClellan. McClellan is a man who is brilliant at organizing an army but terrified of using it. He constantly believes he is outnumbered. But days before the battle, fate handed McClellan a miracle. 2 Union soldiers resting in a field found a bundle of 3 cigars wrapped in a piece of paper. That paper was General Lee's Special Order 191. It was the entire Confederate battle plan. McClellan had the enemy's playbook in his hands. He famously boasted, "Here is a paper with which if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home." Yet, in typical fashion, he hesitated. He waited. And that delay gave Lee just enough time to scramble his forces and dig in at the town of Sharpsburg. When the sun rose on that Wednesday morning, a heavy fog blanketed the ground. It was deceptively peaceful. But as the mist lifted, hell was unleashed in 3 distinct acts of tragedy. The first phase began at dawn in a place known as the Cornfield. Imagine a 24-acre plot of tall, ripening corn, standing head-high. The Union launched a massive assault with the Iron Brigade. They marched right into the waiting guns of Stonewall Jackson's hardened veterans. What followed was described by witnesses as the most terrifying artillery fire of the entire war. Cannons fired canister shot, essentially giant tin cans filled with iron balls, turning field guns into massive shotguns. The corn stalks were sliced down as if by invisible scythes, and the men fell with them. The visibility was zero. The smoke from the black powder was so thick that men were firing blindly into the gray haze, often killing their own friends. In the span of just a few hours, the ownership of that cornfield changed hands no fewer than 15 times. By 10 in the morning, the corn was gone. The stalks had been completely leveled by bullets. The ground was no longer brown earth, it was a carpet of blue and gray bodies, so thick you could walk across the field without stepping on the soil. General Joseph Hooker later wrote that the cornfield was the most dismal sight he had ever looked upon. As the fighting in the cornfield died down, the horror shifted to the center of the line at midday. Here, the Confederates had occupied an old, sunken wagon road worn down by years of rain and traffic. It formed a perfect natural trench, a fortress of earth. For hours, wave after wave of Union soldiers charged this position, only to be mowed down by blistering rifle fire. It seemed impregnable. But then, a confusion in orders caused a Confederate regiment to pull back, leaving a gap. The Union seized the high ground looking down into the road. Suddenly, the defenders became the trapped. Union soldiers fired down into the trench, turning it into a slaughter pen. The Confederates were trapped in a bowl of death. The blood flowed so freely that it formed pools in the bottom of the track. When the firing finally stopped, bodies were piled 3 and 4 deep, intertwined in death. From that day forward, the sunken road was erased from the maps, forever renamed the Bloody Lane. But the day was not done. The final act of this tragedy took place in the afternoon at a stone arch bridge crossing Antietam Creek. Union General Ambrose Burnside was ordered to cross it. The creek was actually shallow enough to wade across in many places, but Burnside, fixated on the bridge, funneled his men into a fatal bottleneck. On the high bluffs overlooking the bridge, a few hundred Georgia sharpshooters held off an entire Union Army corps. For hours, it was a shooting gallery. The bridge became slick with blood. Finally, the Union managed to storm across and began to push the exhausted Confederates back towards the town. It looked like the end for Robert E. Lee. His army was broken, his line was thinning, and he had no reserves left. Total victory for the North was minutes away. But at that exact moment, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It was Confederate General A.P. Hill, arriving from Harper's Ferry in a forced march at a breakneck pace. His men, wearing captured blue uniforms, smashed into the Union flank, confusing the Northern troops and halting their advance. The sun set. The battle ended in a stalemate. The aftermath was a scene from a nightmare. The silence that followed the 12 hours of thunder was broken only by the crying of thousands of wounded men calling for water, for their mothers, or for death to end their pain. The medical technology of 1862 was medieval compared to the weaponry. Surgeons worked non-stop, their piles of amputated limbs growing higher outside the hospital tents. 23,000 men fell that day. To put that in perspective, that is more than the population of many American towns, wiped out between breakfast and dinner. This battle also changed how the public saw war. Photographer Alexander Gardner, working for Matthew Brady, arrived days later to take pictures of the bloated corpses before they were buried. When these photos were displayed in New York, the public was shocked. For the first time, war wasn't a romantic painting, it was rotting bodies and bloated faces. So, why does Antietam matter if it ended in a draw? Tactically, it was inconclusive. But strategically, it changed the world. Robert E. Lee was forced to retreat back to Virginia. His invasion had failed. This gave President Abraham Lincoln the political strength he needed. He had been waiting for a victory to issue a document he had kept in his desk drawer for months. 5 days after the battle, Lincoln announced the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. In that moment, the Civil War transformed. It was no longer just a political dispute about preserving a map, it became a moral crusade against slavery. Because of this shift, Britain and France, who had been close to supporting the South, backed away. They could not support a nation fighting for slavery against a nation fighting for freedom. The 23,000 men who bled into the soil of Antietam did not die in vain. They bought the time necessary to change the course of history. But the question remains, haunting historians for over a century, if General McClellan had not hesitated, if he had used his overwhelming numbers to crush Lee that day, could the war have ended 2 years earlier, saving hundreds of thousands of lives? That is the tragedy of Antietam. The bloodiest day, the biggest missed opportunity, and the moment America changed forever. What do you think? Was McClellan's caution justified, or was it a failure of nerve?